Well, hello, students. It is, for me, it's Friday, September 29th. For you, it's probably sometime next week. If so, happy October. We are sort of in this, I think, this fun spot in this course where we are transitioning from the theorists and the theories to the practices and the neuroscience. And so that's kind of what we're going to really start diving into today. We talked about, Erickson, Piaget, and Vygotsky, these kind of three main figures in education psychology, and then we got into how from their work we've got these two main ways of thinking, which are cognitivism and constructivism. And of course, there's other theories. There's expressivism and connectivism and all of these branches. But those are the two main shaping forces in the world of education psychology, are cognitivism, constructivism. And hopefully you guys were able to write a letter to Noah's parents last week, addressing your plan to help Noah get caught up. I'm really excited to read those. I'm filming this before the assignments due, so I haven't read them yet. But hopefully you were able to start seeing the difference between cognitivism and constructivism in a really practical way. And then what we're going to start doing now is we've got our kind of our basics covered and our terms defined. And now, in my opinion, the next step in this course is to start looking at um, a more in-depth look at how both cognitivism and constructivism play a part in school, really getting into the practical side of things. So today, we're going to start with a cognitivist buzzword, which is engagement. It is also very constructivist, so I'd say we call it a cognitive constructivist. Um, and in order to go over what engagement is, we're going to have to understand the way the memory works. And a lot of the information I'm going to talk to you about today actually comes from our course text in Cengage. So I'm assigning you guys to read chapter 8 of the e-text Psychology Applied to Teaching. It is on what's called information processing theory. And information processing theory, I think, is a very, very important thing to understand. Um, and it's going to go through the memory. It's not a very long chapter. I have the link in Moodle right here, Cengage link. You can click it. I believe you should be able to get in pretty easily and then read chapter 8, which is information processing theory. And it should not take you too long. It's probably one of the shorter chapters there. It's going to give you an overview of what information processing theory is. It's going to kind of give you the two sides of the equation and say, hey, just so you know, this is theory. Not everything is completely understood. And then it's going to start getting into the model of sensory register, short-term memory, long-term memory. And then it's going to talk about things like why we forget stuff, how children process information, how we think about thinking and how we think about our own memories, and then how technology can be a tool. I'm not too interested in the technology as a tool part. You could probably skip 8-4, just read through 8-3, the metacognition. So, yeah. So that's what we're doing today. We're going to discuss how our brains start to take in information and store it. And just as a very quick connection point, the word engagement always shows up in schools, and it also always shows up in cognitive constructivism. Okay, so this is not really a behaviorism thing. This would totally be within the world of building blocks, like we've been talking about, and viewing education through the lens of building blocks and storage. Um, and if you remember from last week, the cognitive constructivist would be the group of theorists who kind of view learning as the scavenger hunt with the basket, that things you're putting things into the basket and then you need to be able to pull things out. So the memory is really, really important because memory is the retrieval system. And so for your notes today, I wanted to go over how the memory works. This is in the text as well, but I just think it's really, really important that we link the text to something as important as engagement in our classrooms. So I'm gonna make some connections between the text and real classrooms right now. So hopefully you enjoy the video. I'll try to keep it under 30 minutes as usual. Hopefully I don't run out of time like last time, but that's what we're doing today. So to start, let me just give you three terms. We have very complex memory systems. Our memories in our heads are in our limbic systems, in our brains, and the limbic system. I've covered it in some other classes recently as well. The limbic system, if you remember from your psychology course, is really comprised of four main components: the hippocampus, the hypothalamus, the thalamus, and the amygdala. And when it comes to the limbic system, it's not just memory. The limbic system also stores senses. It helps us understand the world through smell, through taste, through sight, through touch and texture, and all the different senses that we experience. And it also is responsible for essentially storing that information and those inputs with emotions. So it helps regulates our emotions. So as you probably already know from other classes, your senses, your memories, and your emotions are connected. Okay. And that's how our brain works. It stores senses, memories, and emotions together. So essentially, what happens is, and the best example would be when let's think of a, like, we'll call it a trigger, but sometimes that word is viewed negatively. I mean it just as much positively. Let's say you walk into a bakery and it smells just like the cinnamon and the fall smell that you grew up smelling when your mom would cook or your dad would cook in the kitchen. The cinnamon rolls on Thanksgiving morning or something like that. That smell can trigger memories, and those memories are connected to emotions. And very interestingly, all of a sudden you're smelling these cinnamon rolls and you're just feeling happy because your memory has evoked that emotion. That's the work of the limbic system. And we're not going to go into that super, super thoroughly today, but our memories are linked to senses and to emotions, and that can be a really good or a really bad thing. Um, for people who've experienced trauma, their memories are linked to negative emotion, and triggering sensory information can make them relive a really hard moment in our classrooms, just like that. So we have to understand the limbic system is where all this is happening, and we can never detach memory from emotions or from senses. So yeah, that's kind of what we're working through here today is the memory component. But of course, the very first thing is called the sensory register. So there's sensory. So also just remember though, emotion is caught up in this as well. And as we go through this, I just want to give a very, very important caveat to everything. And here's this important caveat. As we talk about memory, um, please, please know that what we discuss is a general rule, but exceptions do exist. I never ever want to talk about these types of things, um, and as if this is 100% of the times this is how it works. This is still theory, right? We know so little about the human brain still that for me to come and call this like all 100% proof would be wrong. So we're going to talk about the rule or the observed evidence for what most likely happens, but exceptions do exist. So keep that in mind. Um, the last thing you want is to take the information we talk about today and then throw it out because one exception exists. Don't do that, okay? So, all right, let's talk about this. Very first part of your memory system is what's called the sensory register. The sensory register is essentially the part of your brain or the part of your memory system that takes in information from the senses. Okay. Senses would be sight, smell, sounds, tastes, textures. Okay. Takes information in from the senses and equates them to a mental picture, might be a way of it putting it, or a mental, we'll just call it a memory, right? And equates them to a memory. Okay. It is essentially a an exercise of the imagination. Okay. The memory and the imagination are linked, right? They're the same side of the different, or the different sides of the same coin. Your memory is a form of imagination, and your imagination is informed by memories. And all of this is coming through the part of the brain called the hippocampus, which is one of the big four parts of the limbic system. So, the part of the memory that takes in information from the senses and equates them to the memory is what we call the sensory register. And it is using imaginative visualization processes to store that information. But here's the thing about the sensory register. It only it only will last 1 to 3 seconds. Okay? So, you look at the room that you are in this very moment, and then close your eyes. Try to think of what you saw. It's not going to be very clear. You're not going to be able to remember very much. Okay. So if you experience something, you have roughly 1 to 3 seconds to decide if you're going to want to put it in short term memory or not. Okay. Or put yourself in the position of a student. Let's say the teacher's at the front of the room talking about something. You are not taking notes, you are just listening. You have to essentially decide, do I want this to go to my working memory or not? Okay. And if you say, I don't want to remember this, you zone out. Within 1 to 3 seconds, everything the teacher said will be gone. Okay. You have 1 to 3 seconds. And in that 1 to 3 seconds, you must decide, this is huge, if you will give the stimulus your, what do you think the word is going to be? This is a fill in the blank, right? This is going to be a fill in the blank on your guided note sheet. What do you think it's going to be? The answer is attention. Okay? Attention is a hot commodity. You have a million things vying for your attention. Every sight and sound and smell, everything you learn at school, all the things you're supposed to read, you need to decide if you're going to give it your attention or not. And attention, which is essential. Let me just give you the definition of attention. Attention is a willful act of showing or of encouraging your mind to remember something. That's what the attention really is. It's a willful act of encouraging your mind to remember something. And when you give something your attention, it moves the stimulus from the sensory register to the short-term memory. Okay? This is the theory. Again, this is a theory. This is not like an exact science. We don't have like this organ in our head called the short-term memory, right? That's not, we don't have that. Okay? So when you give something your attention, it moves the stimulus from the sensory register to the short-term memory. This is the theory. I believe it's true. If I don't pay attention to something, it's gone like that. If I do pay attention to something, it might stick right there in my short-term memory for a little bit. Okay? Not exactly rocket science here. Attention is the part, or it's the act that allows us to take something and decide if we're going to remember it or not, or if we're going to remember it a little bit or not. Okay, because we're going to talk about short-term memory next, and there's a whole, there's a bit to talk about with short-term memory as well. So the short-term memory, if we pay attention to something, that stimulus ends up in the short-term memory. And the short-term memory is the part of the memory system that takes information from the sensory register and the word store might be too strong, and stores it for roughly, how long would you guess? This is going to be another fill in the blank. How long do you think your short-term memory can last? Well, in truth, short-term memory lasts about 20 seconds. Okay? You get about 20 seconds before it's gone. That does not mean, though, this does not mean it is forgotten necessarily. Okay? You've had 20, you paid attention to it. It landed in the brain, it landed in the short-term memory. You got that 20 seconds to sort of decide, does this matter or not? And to try to store it in short-term memory. But after that 20 seconds is up, you don't just forget it forever. Okay? You might just have to work a bit to get it. Okay? And that's the difference between short-term memory and working memory. Working memory is the term to essentially define, it's the term to describe the part of the short-term memory that is capable of recall. Okay? That's what working memory is. So let's just say I am in a class and the teacher says something. I decide to pay attention to it. I move it to my short term memory, but I don't write it down. I don't do anything to move it to long term memory, but I did pay attention. I didn't do anything to move it to long term memory, but I did pay attention. Okay, 20 seconds ish goes by. I leave class. A day goes by. And then a friend of mine brings up that subject and goes, "Hey, remember when we were in that class, we talked about this," and gives me some memory joggles and kind of helps me go back and dig deep. And I go, "Oh, yeah, I guess I didn't really remember that. But now that you say it, I do." That's the working memory, okay? It's capable of recall because something that's in the short term memory does not just fade away forever. Maybe eventually it does, but there is a working memory system that allows you to retrieve stuff from the short term memory, okay? And that's the working memory. What's better, though, is trying to get information from short term to long term. Our long term memory, which is our next topic, though, it's a really our long-term memories are precious. We cannot take every single thing that we learn and put it in long-term memory. Long-term memory doesn't work that way. Long-term memory is reserved for certain things that we care about. That's what all of the research is showing. Okay? And that's where this next bullet point comes in. In order to move something, a stimulus, from from short-term memory / working memory to the long-term memory, you need to have what? Or the stimulus needs to have blank. What is the quality that allows us to truly remember something in long-term memory? And if you paid attention to the top of the page, attention and meaningfulness. Wow, I can't speak. Meaningfulness. When something is meaningful to us, it essentially, keep saying the word essentially. My apologies. That word is such an abused word. When something is meaningful to us, it does not just go to the working memory, it gets stored in long term memory. Now, at this point, it's probably important that I define the term stimulus a little bit more. When I talk about a stimulus, yeah, sure, it could be the sight or sound that I just happen to come across, but it can also be something conceptual. Okay. It could also be something like a topic of conversation or the topic of something you're learning in school that it really, it, it's not just words that happen to you, right? This is something, a stimulus can be an actual concept that's discussed at length. So, for example, let me just give you kind of this process with two examples. Let's say you don't love math. You're like me. You don't love math and you're in math class. You have the sensory register and you decide, I really want to do well in math. I'm going to pay attention. So you're taking notes, you're doing everything you can in your math class, but you want to do well, but it's not like your big goal in life to be a mathematician. You just want to pass the class. What's going to happen in that is you're going to take it in through the sensory register, the topic of logarithms, or it could be long division, or whatever it may be. You do pay attention, you move it to that short term memory, you write it down, you're finding ways to embed it in your memory, but you don't care about it deeply. So it ends up in the working memory. And you have retrieval mechanisms like your notes to go grab it and keep it in your memory, but it's really a short term memory thing. Conversely, let's say you are in a literature class and you're talking about something. Um, you're talking about the theme of resilience, and you're talking about something that truly matters to you. You take in the information through sensory register, you pay attention, and then as you pay attention, you are invested. It means something to you. You care about the conversation. You find yourself feeling passionate. Someone says something you disagree with, and you argue with them. Next thing you know, that meaningfulness will have that stimulus in your long-term memory. Okay? So that's the way you can envision this happening. Okay? So long-term memory is the part of the memory that stores information that you truly care about. Okay? And this is based on research. This is not this is it's still a theory, of course, but this is not just based on some willy-nilly person's ideas from the 1930s. This is truly evidenced again and again. The more meaning and emotion that we connect to a stimulus, the more likely that stimulus will end up in long-term memory. Okay. And this goes back to the very title of this video: interest, attention, and meaningfulness. We talked about attention, we talked about meaningfulness, but I want to talk about interest. When someone is genuinely interested in a topic, their memory will readily store that information in the long term. Okay? When you are truly interested in something, you will put it in long term. And there's two primary ways this happens. We already know there's the two ways. You already know you're interested and want to learn more. Okay? So this would be, you have a topic you really care about, so that's why you took the class in the first place, or that you were really interested in it, so that's why you listened to the podcast or watched the YouTube video or had the conversation or read the book. You're already interested in it. You want to learn more. That is a way that your long-term memory will instantly go, yeah, we want to remember this, okay? But then the other way is it's surprising, right? You are not expecting something to interest you, but it does. The reason I bring this up is because typically, a few times in our lives, we'll have this aha moment where things that weren't seemingly connected before are all of a sudden connected. And our brains that cared about something else and were interested in something else now go, I'm also interested in that light bulb. This is called synaptic connection. Okay. And synaptic connection is an incredible process where when the brain links things that were previously unrelated, but now you realize they're related, the emotion that you had gets crossed over. Okay. Because remember, memory is linked to emotion. Because memory and emotion are linked, synaptic connections can share memory or can share emotions. So that becomes a huge part of the cognitivist learning modality is you are essentially trying to build on information in a way that if they're interested, you keep them interested. And if they're not interested, you're finding ways to connect it to what they are interested in. So that's why it's such a big deal in education. Okay. I'm going to make that note. This is a big deal in education because it means that the job of the educator is twofold: make connect or help students get interested get interested in a topic, because interest, this will lead to attention and meaningfulness. Okay. Or connect new content, new stimuli to topics that students are already interested in. Okay. And this will lead to meaningfulness through synaptic connection. So that's the theory, right? This is the theory of learning that cognitivists say if you can make students interested in what you are teaching, their attention will naturally occur. It'll automatically go to their memory through meaningfulness or connect it to something that already means to them, and it will stick because you connected it to something that's already in long term. And this whole process is called engagement. Okay. This whole process is called engagement. And I know that you guys have heard this word before. This word's thrown around so much, and sometimes it's thrown around as if it's just interest or as if it's just attention. It is not just interest, it is not just attention. Engagement, true engagement, is the process of A, creating new interest, or B, linking something new to an old interest. That is the only way engagement truly works. And engagement scientists see it over and over again. Synaptic connection or new interest is how you get something to stick. So, that I think will suffice for the video. I want you guys to also, of course, read that chapter on Cengage, and it will add to what I've said. I think what I've said does do a pretty good job of summarizing some of the information in the chapter as well. So hopefully there's a good bit of overlap there. That's all I have for you guys today. You have an assignment. Check it out on Moodle. Let me know if you have any questions. See ya.